It's my great honor to introduce another remarkable woman, someone who is a mentor, a personal mentor to me and to many of us in this room, a woman who has also dedicated her life to fighting for the rights of many, many women, who was a leader on the inside. You'll hear from her about some of the work that she did, but just really a remarkable human being who brought college back into prisons when it was taken away, who helped start the first HIV peer program that became a national model and is replicated in prisons and communities around the country. As Sharon mentioned, the incredible Kathy Boudin.
I mean, the thing that's kind of crazy about it is, like, everybody that was just up here, we were all together for so many years. And anything that I was part of, I was part of it because we did it together. And I think that's the main thing. And I just want to say that anybody that thinks that I'm Cheryl Wilkins' boss, I think we got it backwards. All right, so, I try to think about, like, what are the narratives about women in prison? I mean, one narrative, of course, is one nice narrative, really nice compared to the other ones, are women as a victim. And we know from all the things that Sharon just gave, the statistics, women are, in fact, victims of domestic violence, violence in the community, violence in families, and they're victims in terms of the economic and racial and class structure of our society that creates disrespect and lack of jobs and lack of education. So yes, women in fact are victims, and sometimes that's the sole portrayal of women in prison. Well, there's another narrative, which is women and their deficits, right? Women, they use drugs, they don't have an education, they came to prison without jobs, they were on welfare. So we need to fix those women and rehabilitate them to deal with their deficits. So women in terms of their weaknesses, that's a second narrative. A third narrative is the labeling of women, reducing women to their crime. Man-hater, hoe, bitch, cop killer, baby killer. I mean, freezing women, labeling women, freezing women in a way that reminds me of, in a way, the Tilly Olsen story. I stand here ironing, flattening women out in the way that the iron flattened that shirt out. But in fact, I think that all of us here, and I think that probably those of you that have heard this today, there's a whole other narrative about women in prison. Those narratives, yeah, it's true women have been victims, and it's true that women come to prison with challenges to deal with in ourselves. But there's something different, because those labels define women as passive, needing to be changed. And in fact, we are change agents. We've made change, and we've made change in ourselves, we've made change in our community, and those changes that we've made in our community in prison actually reached outside the prison. And, in some ways, we know, those of us in prison, that we have to take responsibility for the things that we did that harmed other people, whether it was our families, whether it was people that we didn't know. We know our responsibility, and we have to work on that responsibility. But we have to do that. But at the same time, it's in trying to change and change things around us that we do make changes. And some of these are seen in very small ways. For example, if you look at women walking to programs, walking to the school or the laundry, they look like, or we look like, the ocean at night, a sea of green, in our green pants, and our green jumpers, and our green shirts. We were a sea of green. You could see no distinction, but if you look closely, you would see each woman in her own way resisting the loss of that identity. You would see a crease in a pair of pants or a crease in a shirt that was a style. A violation sewing anything into those state pants, and yet it was an expression of the individuality. Or you would see the dreads with red and gold beads, and you would see an afro, maybe, and you would see a woman with the illegal nail polish, with her nails painted with a crescent moon in a dark sky. So always there was a resistance to taking away one's own individuality. And then you would see how, as women, we figured out a way in the darkest of times, in the hardest of times, not just to laugh, which we did do, because laughter got us through, but to figure out how do we celebrate. And so for Christmas, a hard time when we're away from our kids and our family members and our friends, in one unit where we lived, people made a big tree out of paper and put it on the rec room wall. And women put up photos of family and friends and children as leaves. And those leaves represented the connection that we felt with our families outside. In another time, there was a Christmas time when people asked each other, what would you like? What's your dream? And somebody would say freedom, or a car, or a trip to the Bahamas, or just a reunion with my child. And a card was made for all 60 women with a picture from a magazine. And somebody on Christmas Day put all of those cards in a big bag and called out everybody's name and gave them their gift and their dream. So we knew how to celebrate, even in this time when it seemed like celebration wasn't possible. But then there were things that we did that were really ideas that created programs. Let's look at an image. In the mid-1990s, 10 women got up on a stage in the gym, a gym very much like this one at Bedford Hills. And each of those 10 women surrounded, it was a hearing, it was actually a public hearing with judges and prosecutors, with the media, the news, lawyers, and legislators. What was it about? It was about domestic violence. It was the beginning of women themselves defining what needs to be done about domestic violence. And each woman told her story of killing someone. She had connected the dots in a process that took place before that hearing. And when she got on stage, she was able to explain to the world, through the media, why it was that she had come to use violence. And the beginnings of domestic violence programs, of consciousness among legislators and judges and prosecutors, and at Bedford, a family violence program was established that women became peer counselors in to help each other be able to move beyond the trauma that they'd experienced. Another image. In the yard at Bedford Hills, which is where I was for the 22 years I was there, women are walking around the yard in a walkathon. Around the yard, around the yard, around the yard for the afternoon, a walkathon to give money to the Incarnation Children's Center for babies that were dying because there was no cure at that time. And the people who gave the money was the officers, the guards, people in the administration, people's family members. By 1993 and 94, the ACE program had built such a consciousness of support and caring that there was able to be a walkathon. And at that night, as darkness fell, the women came outside into the yard, and everybody had on something with red, and made a ribbon, a large ribbon, that was the symbol of the movement to struggle against the AIDS epidemic. And names were called out of each of the women that had died in prison, many of the names being up here today, and family members and babies who had died. 1 out of every 5 women coming into Bedford Hills was HIV positive. 1 out of every 5 at that time. And then we joined arms, and we looked up at the sky, and we sang the song, Sister, I Will Take You in My Arms. And the ACE program, as Sharon said, went on to become a model for all of New York State, and then the country, and then we wrote a book called Breaking the Walls of Silence that went to every prison library in the country with the curriculum and the story. Image number 3. Women sit in a classroom and they're talking about their children. On the wall are hearts and photos of each of our children next to them. And we talk about having left our children. We talk about seeing them in the visiting room and how to deal with it. We talk about our children becoming adolescents. Then we create a group for ourselves about being mothers of adolescents. And one woman teaches that group, and then another woman who was in the group, she becomes the teacher for that group. And then we talk about another class, foster care and child custody, and one woman teaches it, and then another woman teaches it, and 5 years later, another woman teaches it. Each one teach one. And how did it happen that women were able to be caregivers in the nursery and caregivers in the children's center and teach classes? Partly it happened because women can do these things, and partly it happened because the superintendent, Elaine Lord at that time, and Elaine Roulet, Sister Elaine Roulet, saw the possibility that we could do those things. Another image, college. College. In 1996, or 1995, after Congress in 1994 had taken away money to support the college program, the college office that we have had to be dismantled. That office had been a community of learning. Books, a library, counseling. And with tears, the women who staffed that program took down book after book. The old word processors that we had got put into boxes. The college program was closed. Fights began to break out. Instead of going down the hill each night with books under our arms, instead, people argued. Even people working for their GED lost a motivation because of how much looking ahead at college had given people an inspiration. And then the women got together and they went to the superintendent and they said, what do you think? If we can get private funding, do you think that Governor Pataki would let a college come back here? And the superintendent said she would think about it and came back and said she thought it could happen. And so with the administration, with people in the field, civilians in the field, it wasn't long until a new college program was born. And out of that process, not only came college, but a report, Changing Minds, that got sent to the governor's office, every governor of every state, that said college is needed back again. And so if you look at each of these images, the images that I'm showing you, each one of them was something that was driven by the women. None of it could have happened without help from some of you that are here that were civilians at the time, some of you that are staff, because we couldn't do it alone. But we were the engine. We were the engine that made it happen. And that's what we're able to do. And I think that that is so unknown by people outside the realm of that are close in. And that's why this Women's Center, and that's why events like today are so important. How can I end without talking what it means to be inside, to face sentences that you look ahead and see dying in prison, that your sentence is so long? And people always ask me, you don't think Judy will ever get out, do you? And against the pessimism, against the odds, Judy continued to hope and to believe it was possible, struggling through the darkest days. And we're celebrating Judy and clemency, and we're thinking about the women that are still there, who continue to survive and to hope. Should I name names? I mean, there's so many, I'm going to forget somebody. Rosalind Smith, 38 years, came in when she was 17. No. And her co-defendant, Val Gator. And Pam Smart, life without parole, the first of many with life without parole. Veronica Sullivan. And Monica Slekowitz. I mean, there's too many names. How can I name them all? Please forgive me for not naming everybody. But I guess what I want to say is that we need to think about the great gospel singer Yolanda Adams' words. She said, so don't be afraid to face the world against all odds. Keep the dream alive. Don't let it die. If something deep inside keeps inspiring you to try, don't stop and never give up. Don't ever give up on you. Don't ever give up. Every victory comes in time. Work today to change tomorrow. It gets easier. Who's to say that you can't fly? We flied, we flew, and we're flying.